Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The lawsuit that ended race-based admissions at universities around the country cost the University of North Carolina nearly $25 million to defend. Most of that money went to an international law firm whose attorneys charged the university nearly $1,000 an hour. The cost provides insight into the financial impact of high-profile cases on universities, and WRAL's reporting on it has revealed consternation among UNC leaders over the cost. WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain broke the story, and he joins us now. Travis, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Before we dig into the dollars and cents of this, give us a quick history of the case. Why was UNC at the center of it?
So for years, UNC and a lot of other universities around the country have tried to beef up at least a little the number of minority students that they admit by taking that into account when people apply to go to college. And a group filed lawsuit and said that's unconstitutional. You can't do that. And basically, eventually, this worked its way over years and years and years to the United States Supreme Court, which struck down the practice. And so now these universities are having to change those policies.
Now, defending yourself in a Supreme Court case obviously requires some resources. How did UNC do it?
So they have a general counsel's office, and the attorney general has obviously hundreds of lawyers here that work for state government. So they leaned on that, but they also hired some outside counsel. They hired a law firm that is an international law firm, has locations all over the world and in the country. And it's a big-time firm. And like you said earlier, they paid close to $1,000 an hour for these attorneys. And in fact, that was a cut rate. I was told that it could have been even more for the partners that did this work.
And you report that the total was about $25.4 million. What did they get for that money?
So they got representation through the federal district courts. The case kind of dragged on for years and years and years. Discovery, that's probably something people are familiar with, but that's where you have to turn over lots of documents in a court case. It's fairly complicated. There was voluminous discovery in this case, so they handled stuff like that. They did not handle the actual Supreme Court arguments. The Attorney General's office handled that, so that cut the bills down. But out of the $25 million, most of that, I think $18.2 million, went to that law firm called Skadden, Arps, Meager, and Flom, and the rest of it went to a group called Cornerstone Research, which specializes in witness preparation. So any case like this, you're going to have to find experts to testify to try to convince the court that you're right, and then you're going to work with those experts. You're going to practice, and so that's the kind of stuff that Cornerstone works with.
Now, UNC is obviously a state entity. They have their own general counsel's office, as you mentioned. Why not lean more on those resources and the state attorney general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason I did the story. And I've been doing this job long enough to know, they hired outside counsel, and it's going to be really expensive, even though they've got their own internal general counsel's office of 19 people, the attorney general's office, the board of governors, the university system, which is above UNC. We have all these campuses that are split up, and we're talking about Chapel Hill here. But there's a lot of different attorneys in the system, and they did lean on them, but they also, as we've said, brought in this outside counsel. So, I mean, that was my question, is why. And, I mean, of course, they say, well, we need this expertise, and it's a very long, drawn-out process. I mean, but the bottom line for a lot of these things is they just get more and more expensive as they go on, and there's not a ton of accountability on how much money these things end up costing.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about why current UNC leaders are a little bit uneasy about the costs. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain about UNC's legal fees in the recent affirmative action Supreme Court case. Travis, before the break, you mentioned a little bit about why you wanted to look into this. Have you done stories like this before?
Yeah, I've done a few of them. One of the things I like to do, and I know I've done it in Virginia where I used to work, I can't remember if I've done it here before or not, is compare what the public pays attorneys when elected officials or very powerful people need legal representation versus what we pay, for example, public defenders. Spoiler alert, the powerful people get better lawyers or at least more expensive lawyers. So I'm always interested in kind of the hourly rate, what we're paying when it is someone high up who needs representation. And in this case, it's not so much someone high up who needed representation as this university policy that university officials felt was important and was, of course, a very big case.
Walk us through how you got the information.
I filed a public open records request and didn't end up getting specific bills. They basically just said, all right, this is clearly the question you're asking. We will answer it for you. So it was a fairly simple process with UNC.
Now, one of the things that you learned while reporting this is that UNC leaders had some consternation about the tab. Why is that?
Yeah, so UNC, like a lot of places, has kind of joint leadership. There's a board of trustees that makes the policies, and then there's an administration. And the administration, they kind of defended the spending. But some members of the board of trustees said, "Oh boy, that was a lot of money, and we're not sure it was worth it." You know, the former chairman, up until a couple of weeks ago, the chairman Dave Bullock said, "Look, none of us on the board of trustees, we were not in charge back in, I think it was 2014 when this thing started." So. All the leadership at UNC has turned over, all the top leadership has turned over since this decision was made, A, to defend the case, and B, to hire this particular law firm. So there was some feeling that they were kind of trapped at that point. Because once you've started the case, you got to see it on to the end. And there are costs in switching attorneys. And they did put some things in to kind of try to control the cost. They said the law firm worked with them to keep those costs down. There was also some concern. I don't know if everybody knows what an amicus brief is, but it's a brief that would be filed in an important case where a party not involved in the case would say, "Hey, I got an opinion on this. This could impact me. Let me weigh in." And the UNC said, all these people filed in all these other universities and all these other entities were interested in the case. We didn't get a check from any of them, though. So UNC felt like it was left out there a little bit on its own.
So hindsight is obviously 2020. Why did university leaders press ahead with the lawsuit at the time when it was brought?
Well, I think they thought it was an important policy to defend because they wanted their student body to look a certain way, although minority representation at UNC Chapel Hill is quite low, even with this policy. But unfortunately, I couldn't get any of the people who were around in 2014, or at least I called the chair of the board of trustees at the time and the president of the university at the time. Neither would talk to me, so.
Now, Harvard University was also involved in this case. How did UNC's cost compare to Harvard's?
From what I can tell, they were really similar. So the way the case started was as two cases. One, Harvard University sued because they're a private university with a similar policy. The other, UNC, kind of a stand-in for all the public universities around the country. And, Harvard being private didn't have to tell me how much they spent, and they didn't. But they had filed their own lawsuit trying to recoup money from an insurance policy they had. They actually had a couple of insurance policies. One of the insurers that was going to cover litigation costs didn't want to pay because Harvard had failed to inform them in time. Harvard literally missed a deadline that cost them $15 million on an insurance policy. The reason that is relevant here because as part of that lawsuit to try to recoup the insurance policy, which they failed to do, they had to say how much they spent. And they said, we spent more than $25 million. That's more than UNC spent.
Now, this obviously is the biggest case that UNC has faced in a number of years, but it's not the only one, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're a university, you get sued, and there have been some high-profile lawsuits where the bills have been in the millions of dollars. This is the most expensive one that I know of, though. And it's probably worth noting their opponents spent a lot less. I mean, I think it was something like $8 million they spent to sue both Harvard and UNC together, although their lawyers worked pro bono, which means for free a lot. So we don't really know the true cost there, although we might find out because one of the things that happens after a lawsuit is the other side will often file and say, hey, we want the other side to pay our legal bills. So UNC and Harvard are probably going to get some sort of additional billing to pay for the winner's side here.
Now, $25 million sounds like a lot of money by itself, but when you put it in the context of a $30 billion budget for the state, it doesn't seem like a lot. Why should taxpayers care about these kinds of things?
It still seems like a lot to me, and I'm a taxpayer. So, it certainly in context, it's a small part of the budget, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I would just leave it up to everybody to decide. I mean, we pick our leaders and then they make these decisions for us. I mean, does everybody think we needed $1,000 an hour team of attorneys, multiple attorneys charging $1,000 an hour to defend this for, close to a decade.
And if these costs go unchecked?
Yeah, one of the things that is a core tenet of journalism is at least let them know we're looking. We're asking afterwards. So good idea, bad idea. I'm going to have to justify it to the public at some point. So let me, because I know I'm going to have to justify it, there's some accountability there. Let me think about that before I make a decision as a public official.
Well, Travis, thanks for shedding light on it.
Thanks for having me.
That's WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain. For his reporting on UNC's legal costs, go to nccapital.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.